I shall call the meeting to order and pass it to Michelle for roll call.
Ally. Yep. Matt. Mary. Adrian, I believe is absent. She's out camping. Corbin.
Here.
Sabrina.
Here.
Sue-Ann. Here. Patty. Here. Bill.
Here.
Allison.
Present.
Myra. Here. Sally. There. Kitty. I saw Kitty.
I'm here.
Great. Tommy.
Here.
Jacob.
Here.
Andre.
Here.
And Jessica Green is absent today. But we'll miss her and we'll see her next month. Okay, great.
Okay. Do we have anyone for public comment?
We do not.
Oh, we may, who knows? Any general announcements? Yeah.
Oaks Park was not Oaks Park, Oak Bottom was a little bit on fire when I biked past it on the way here.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Seriously?
yeah, not a lot on fire, but a little bit on fire.
Anything you can offer on that?
What's the scale?
Yeah. Did you go on the spring water?
Went on the spring water and it was like a large grassy patch, but like approaching the tree line, but it looked like a pretty substantial amount was burnt, but like no active flames, just like that low smolder and a lot of fire trucks.
Yeah, I have a just notice of a brush fire, potentially up to 100 by 100. Fire response is active and the Parks Emergency Response Team is tracking closely, but I don't know the particular actions that we're taking at the moment.
It is not in the news yet.
Probably, they're probably on their way.
Yeah. Okay, well. We're starting the rainy season, starting the less scary fire season. Thank you for that, Jacob. So we have two sets of meeting minutes to approve, correct, Michelle? We have June and September. I'm sorry, June and August. So let's do one at a time. And if you were not present, please abstain. Do I have a motion to accept the June meeting minutes? Corbin.
Oops.
Oh, you are muted, Corbin.
Thank you. I'm touching buttons. I didn't try to do that, but I will make a motion to accept the June minutes unless there's any friendly amendments.
Great. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor or any discussion? Jen?
Yeah, I'm checking I don't appear in the June minutes and I'm checking.
Okay.
I think I was there unless someone really remembers me not being there for the record.
I'll make that note, Jen. Thank you.
Okay. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes with the change of Jen being present? Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
I perhaps, because I'm pretty sure I was there, but I was just looking at the notes to see if I was there. But
Well, new folks weren't officially on yet, right? So.
No, but I think at this point they can vote since they were present.
Great.
okay, then I vote to approve.
All right, and we will go also. For August, same thing. Do I have a motion to accept the August meeting minutes?
I'll second.
Great. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from August? Any opposed? And
I think the only abstention for August meeting minutes would be Kitty, since she wasn't present.
okay.
That's correct.
Then we are all set there. Let's move forward to the director's report with Director Smansky.
Okay, hi, everybody. Sonia here. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for being here. I have a grab bag and happy to spend more time on any items that I go over quickly if we have time and that's helpful. So in no particular order, first, a little staffing structure update. Joey Ferruto, who many or most of you probably know from this space, green tent card, is in the Parks Director's office. He is on special assignment to our Deputy City Administrator's office for a period of some months, probably through the end of the year, in a coordinating role, helping information move up and out, helping guidance move down and in. So he'll be doing that, and we can't have enough of that. So God bless him. He's serving the cause. I'm so grateful. And he'll be doing that through end of the year. And then I don't know, the future is unwritten. So what the DCA wants to do with her office and how she wants to roster that, we'll learn more as we get closer. Secondly, and a little bit relatedly also about our structure, I have mentioned to you before, and you have a fuller briefing coming up. So I'll just say again briefly that we have reestablished a central leadership role related to external affairs and partnerships. It's in the director's office. And boy, are we in motion on things. Kelly Torres, who's been in the other room in a previous meeting with you, is in that role temporarily helping build it out. It's responding both to feedback and direction that we've received, but also to forward-looking direction that if the levy passes, one of the things it funds is a position to work specifically on partnerships. So we're both building back from that and forward. We're super active with so many conversations about partnerships. People always are knocking on the door and really interested in talking about ideas or opportunities. We are doing as much of that as we can, working closely with the DCA's office and council offices and mayor's office. Some of those folks are coming to us by way of them. Selwyn Community House is a good example of that. Others are not, they're just kind of prior historical relationships with the Bureau. Pittock Mansion is maybe an example of that. We're spending a lot of time. So a lot is happening on that. We're doing our best to keep it all wrangled and strategic, particularly while we're in building mode. That's a time things can kind of sprawl and get unwieldy. Yeah.
No, just a thing for the board to note is exciting. Next month, Kelly Torres will be here and that will be the main discussion topic. So we'll get to hear a lot more about partnerships and the future, especially with the levy. I know there's been some questions on that. So I'm glad to hear it and I'm glad we're gonna get to hear it.
And if there are particular pieces of that you want to hear about or have her be ready to speak to, send it in maybe through Michelle and we'll be sure that she comes ready to speak to those parts.
How do you define partnerships? Like, are these, I know like Parks has really big partnerships with private companies and then there's like
All of the
Rosewood
above.
Partners with, probably on a very
Yeah.
small scale. So I'm just wondering, what is the?
Yeah, well, that's one of the questions, is to put better definition on the word so we all know what we mean. And we all have the same thing in our mind as we're doing our daily work, however closely we touch it or not. It a little bit depends who you ask. I talked about getting a lot of feedback in that vein and it was different. So Counselor Ryan is very interested in private, corporate, like fundraising partnerships. Council President Pyrtle Guinea, who you know well, had a particular interest in summer free-for-all fundraising. So maybe not at the same scale as Counselor Ryan, but kind of same audience and category of partnership. There are other folks who mean friends groups real specifically when they say that. There are other folks who mean programming partners or operating partners or management partners. And, we're a partnership outfit. So those are all partnerships. How we define it more precisely for the work, where we put the emphasis strategically, are questions still to be explored and answered. And if that's a part, I would really welcome if you all want to provide perspective about that next month. Okay, keep going. Yeah, sorry.
So is that gonna filter through the board as a large gathering, or is it filter through one of the work group, when you
I
just,
don't know.
okay,
I think we gotta figure that out.
I see.
And however you like. I think.
We're gonna start with a presentation to the full
Okay.
board with Kelly
And then
Torres, so that,
discussion.
yeah, cause I know partnerships are gonna be a part. It's a part of what council talked about with the levy and moving forward and kind of a vision for parks. And I know there's, right, like. There's all sorts of partnerships, some which mean fee to get into some of park spaces and some, and some that aren't and some that are friends groups, all sorts of things. So I think there's some questions and. I know that some board members, including myself, have had, so excited to have Kelly coming. I see Corbin's hand is raised.
Thank you. Is it possible when we do have the discussion that we have a good understanding of the fine line between keeping our parks public and the slippery slope to privatization? I would love for them to be able to define that threshold.
I would love that too. I think that's part of the charge. And I take your point and thank you for saying it. I think this might have come up last time too. And it's a place where you're kind of constantly, as leaders come and go, moments come and go, like finding and then refinding the balance point. I would love for that to be something that you weigh in on and share expert perspective about. And Kelly can certainly bring her thoughts and we can talk about that as much as you'd like, definitely.
Yeah, I would definitely like the municipality to have at least an idea of what bounds that they won't go beyond when thinking through this.
Okay. Relatedly, the partnership stuff features prominently in council budget direction, including mostly in the budget notes, which is how they give policy direction in the budget. So those aren't numbers things, those are policy things. There were a number of notes included directing us to do various things related to partnerships and various other things. So we can share more about that. It's a pretty broad array of work, but I just wanted to share that we're hard at work on that. We have some deliverables coming up in terms of reporting back to council starting in December. So we can certainly bring more information about that if you want. I'll provide it between meetings. Also organizationally, we are in a new service area with new leadership and new ways of working and cadences of meetings and communication channels and lanes and preferences and everything is the same, but also everything is new. We are just starting to move into a regular briefing schedule with DCA Donna Paul. So we have a weekly time with her. I think we've had one, so we're stepping into it, but we're gonna be running soon. So I've got a pretty big list that I've sourced from our managers about, and my own read of things that are important and timely and really need to get up to that office for awareness or guidance. It's a little on the spot question here, but I would love any thoughts you have now or later about things you think are particularly important to be elevating. I have the seat I sit in, I have a view, but you have a different view, and I don't want to miss anything. Just a couple more. I know that you all also are a little bit in building mode with your structures and your priorities, including what the city council did, revisiting, refining their list of committees and rules of operation. I think you're doing a little bit of that. However, we can support you in that thinking. And wherever you land on that in terms of work groups you want to continue or sunset or establish, we're excited to help partner with you to get that really like stably launched. The last thing, two more. One is very small. Well, I'll do that one last. SDCs, system development charges. Michelle suggested this and then Ally suggested it also. Earlier this year, Mayor started talking about potential temporary suspension of SDC charges to incentivize development of housing in the city of Portland. Council recently approved that. So that's on the books as a 3-year, 5,000 unit moratorium on citywide SDC charges, including in parks. SDCs are a little different bureau to bureau. They're particularly visible and impactful in parks, including because, as many of you know, as soon as the money is anticipated, the projects are selected and announced. And that's typically wonderful because excitement and awareness and momentum is built. And then you just kind of continue building until you get to your finished product or project. In this case, it's a little harder because there's on the order of $25 million probably of projects that are no longer going to be on the list. We are working hard to get that kind of up onto the radar screen for city leadership so that they can give us direction about how they want us to make those choices about projects to keep or pause. There are lots of different ways you could approach doing that. So that's just about top of the list for me to brief the DCA. And I've been saying this since the beginning when I was in the DCA chair. Parks will need special support in working through those decision points because it is so external and there's just so much community sentiment and hope attached to it. So I hope to have more information about that soon. And if you have, I welcome your perspective as we work through that.
And more of a question. I'm remembering right, it's Columbia Pool, Darcel 15, and I think there's a third one also that is heavily like the SDC funds were kind of slated for those. And I know there's the 3 cents from the levy that's also slated towards capital projects. Do you know if what's the third project that I'm missing? That's the big one, because I think there is.
Probably. So when we were talking about it, we had a kind of working assumption that we would want to preserve the announced investment in North Portland Aquatic Center, new pool, Darcel Plaza, and the Old Town Skate Park. That those were high profile. There's a lot of attachment to those, a lot of prioritization of that among current leadership. But that was just our thinking. So that's not a decision necessarily that's been made.
It would be great. It would be helpful to see a list of what are the potential projects that are affected by it. Just so we can have that understanding of what is on the table and potentially taken off the table.
And when we have a little bit more information about how that process will look, it's occurring to me, maybe the board might want to weigh in on that.
Yeah.
So we could definitely help you do that. The 3 cents in the potential next levies for capital maintenance as opposed to capital expansion. So a little bit different. You could potentially have both in one project, but it's such a different amount of money and it's a different enough purpose that they're mostly in parallel.
Okay.
So it's a certain number of units or a certain amount of time before the SDCs kick back in. Is there a sense at the city of which of those is going to happen first?
Depends who you ask and what day it is and what's in the news. And, it's more maybe art than science, thinking about which comes first and likelihood. People who are a lot smarter than me could give you a better answer. Yes, Claudio, the skate park, SDC forecasters really know how to do that. And the housing production folks do. So if you were interested in a more expert response, I think we could probably get that for you.
That would be helpful. In the kind of, if you give a mouse a cookie vein, has anyone even voiced the idea of extending the SDC pause to a greater number of units or a greater number of years if it's successful in stimulating home construction, housing construction?
Yes, I have heard that. I've heard that every day since I started working here, that SDCs are the but for, so that's been a policy conversation with more and less seriousness, kind of at least for 17 years. And I fully anticipate that if it is successful in producing those units, if it's a pilot that works, why not? And council will hopefully have really good information by then about the trade-offs and the impact of that policy choice, because it's a significant one, you know, and you'd want to have that feedback loop before you, well, I would recommend that they have that feedback loop before they make a choice about extending it.
Thank you.
Okay, and 3 cheers for summer. My last item was just that so much summer programming and staying up at night thinking about pool boilers is drawing to a close. And I'm just so proud and grateful of everything that happened this summer and all the thousands of wonderful moments that occurred. So you're part of that. The black boxes are part of that. Everyone is part of that. And I just am really appreciative. And another great summer. Well done. Well done.
Any other questions? Corbin?
So I don't want to bring down the mood. It was a nice summer. Got to go to the Japanese garden, which is someplace I love going. Recently, well, fairly recently, the mayor as well as city council decided to remove DEI language from municipal documents in compliance with the federal government's ask. My question is, where does that leave the initiative for Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland? And also, what does that mean for the language that we use within our own board around DEI and inclusive park use?
Yeah, great question. Well, I don't precisely know the answer to either of those things, but I can tell you what's happening. And what I do know, we have a lot of people here in the city working really hard to get precise about where they think that legal line is, not the rhetorical line from the president, but the legal line from our federal court system, so that we can be as protective as possible of important municipal work that is happening. We have an equity manager who I think you know, Amanda Manjares. She's really superlative expert thinker and technical expert in this space. She's been working very closely, as have liaisons from around the city with our city attorney's office and with our Office of Equity and Human Rights to do a review of programs, more programmatic than policy oriented, find areas, identify those which feel more vulnerable, and revisit them if needed to make sure that they're within federal law with an eye toward preservation of work and preservation of values. What we have found mostly and so far is that the important changes are to some of the surrounding language and not to the programmatic components. And so it's really more about how you talk about it and less about what you're doing. There are, what's the word? Exceptions to that, but they are exceptions. They're not the rule. Within parks, not a lot popped up. And that's, you know, interpret and analyze that however you choose. But we have really sound, really impactful work happening, and Amanda's working hard with the legal and Office of Equity and Human Rights team to make sure that we're, like I said, as protective of that work as we can be. Specific to Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, I don't know what it means for that. We can certainly gather more information about that for you. And then you had a second piece, what does it mean for the board? You know, that is a really good question that probably has a real specific answer that I'm not aware of. You're in the advisory body space.
That is definitely being talked about as far as we know, because there's already going to be. I've recently been put on this task force, a new task force, which I was on a previous task force before, and I may have mentioned to others about advisory bodies and doing an inventory. Essentially, the goal of this task force is to kind of centralize advisory bodies more instead of having advisors kind of stand on their own island, having just more cohesive things like trainings, bylaws, and just overall formats and compliance. And they have not said anything about changing how we currently practice. And what Sonia's saying is A lot of it is in language rather in the like actual action, so. I'm not, when we recruit for board members, I don't write the acronym DEI necessarily. But I will mention other things that pertain to the subject or what our mission is about. And so we're still doing that work. We're not necessarily saying these explicit words that are kind of being used right now, if that makes sense.
While I do understand that people are being cautious about language, but written language and the language that we use often impact our actions eventually. And so the removal of that puts us in an interesting tension in trusting that people are going to behave outside or with a particular understanding if the language is not there. And so is there, and I understand that you're not in a position to fix this or say this is going to happen. What can we expect as a board, as community members, to make sure that that is being fulfilled, even if it's not being discussed explicitly? And the reason why I'm asking that is because we have on many occasions asked for numbers to be disaggregated amongst race to really understand what's going on in the community. And unfortunately, BIPOC is just another acronym for other. We seem to understand what's going on in the white population, and then everybody else gets lumped in together. And so we can't even tell if these different groups are getting the benefits from the work that's being done in Parks and Rec. And that is a more of a presenting to us issue more than not having the numbers. And so I just wanted to broach this and see how we can find a good way of affirming that the work continues, even if the language is not going to be explicit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I am a little bit out of, like I'm not as close to this day to day, so my language may be imprecise. I'll say again, just to make sure it's really clear, the mayor's been clear and we've all really heard it. The direction here in Portland is not to respond to rhetoric from the White House and not to take all the words that they don't like out of our life and out of our documents and out of our work. It's really around the much narrower legal threshold. So just a kind of definition piece there. But to your bigger question about, well, that's great. How do we know? And how do we keep track of what's changing? And how do we feel confident and comfortable that those values are continuing and that the work is being protected, as you say? Again, out of my depth, that might be a deeper dive conversation with the data folks and Amanda about what we can produce. I don't know, and I think I'm stepping into a river here, so I don't know what precedes this, but I hear that, and I'm happy to continue talking about getting you what you need.
Thank you.
I wonder if this would be a good conversation topic in the community engagement working group, Corbin, to do some of that. Or is it, are you guys, Sabrina, are you the chair?
Yes, I was last year, so I'm happy to do it again.
But
I had a question.
I think there's two things. Sorry, just to jump in. I think it's not only
Mhm.
community engagement, but I think it's board affairs. Because it's
Mhm.
also how we conduct ourselves as a board. So there might be two discourses that come out of it.
Agreed.
I had a different question initially, but I do have a question about Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland. So I definitely, appreciate the conversation on DEI language. But something that I saw in the, I think, director's report was on budget development for the next fiscal year. And as I recall, historically, Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland played a big part in that. And so I'm wondering, is Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland still playing the same role in budget development and what is prioritized? And because when you're looking at operationalizing DEI, as opposed to just the words itself, because that was a place that I thought the Bureau was trying to be very intentional about. And so I'm wondering if, aside from the words DEI, is that Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland work still going on? Is it a part of budget development? And then I have a separate question, but
Yes, with an asterisk that applies to many things, which is, and it's new and it's changing and we're learning, what budget development looks like at the city of Portland. It was really different last year than the year before at a citywide level. It will be different again. And with the kind of secondary asterisk that is the primary operational and strategic decision-making framework for the Bureau. Other bureaus have theirs as well. And then we all layer on top of that, you know, mayor's guidance and particular other guidance that comes in through those channels. So yes. And what it looks like specifically is to be developed. We're just starting to talk about what it looks like for next year now, and it's blank page. That's probably not fair to Claudio to say blank page. It's not a blank page, but we're iterating and changing as we go.
Sabrina, you had a second question and then Sue Ann.
yeah, it was about separate topic. It was about advisory bodies. I received an email in my role as Rosewood. And so I was just wondering if there is an update on that advisory body's work and how that might impact us. I might be in a unique position because when I previously worked for the city, I know that it's been a thing for a long time. So I'm wondering, like, I don't know what's different in this process or how it impacts us. Does it not? I'm just wondering if there's
I would say
any
yes and
update.
no. A lot of the things right now is that the city council is very focused on the fact that we have hundreds of advisory bodies and they are wanting to cull it down. I think I've said this before, a lot of advisory bodies are very topical, whereas ours is very broad and pertains to the entire bureau. And so I'm not worried about like major changes in that way, but things that might change are a more centralized system for trainings. Certain requirements for compliance for public meeting laws, which we already comply with, but some advisory bodies don't. So there's other things that we are already doing that other advisory bodies may not be doing. And everybody's just trying to get everyone in line at the moment. I don't know the more detailed things that might come into play, but there may be just certain added rules and requirements to what we're already doing.
What's the timeline? Like, I'd be wondering.
I'm
what
not
do
sure.
I expect
Meeting
as board
quarterly at the
member and
moment.
when?
We're meeting quarterly, but we might have another meeting next month. In October.
So it seems a little bit more maybe
I'm-
administrative, not so much like
Yes.
the bulk of what we're doing and our focus and our
We haven't
strategies not
involved,
changing.
correct, for
Okay.
sure, yes,
Okay,
And about standardizing, I think, to practices you already have.
yes,
Got it.
yes, absolutely.
Sue Ann.
So I understand everything is kind of trying to figure itself out. Structure. We are now under Public Works umbrella. And we don't usually, I mean, when you were talking about we meet quarterly, things actually are scheduled in a way that is moving forward step by step, but then November is coming, right? Then the whole levy thing, the ballot and all that. There's another parallel track. It's not delaying, it's moving forward. As we trying to figure out, we in the general sense in parks, figure out the kind of pecking order, decision making, and the DEI, I think, I can't help but thinking that there are going to be overarching decision makers already moving forward with decisions. And by the time it gets to us to figure out our input or our advice, kind of like, well, we already move on. It's already too late. Gotta move on. And I don't want to see that we become a little bit of a token gestures. And that's very important because we're all busy and we all have a passion and heart, want to make a difference. So how I understand we're going to like have figure out the system, figure out the language and all that. For me, I am more interested in action. How can we measure success? What's our focus so that we're not constantly meeting to figure out the language? But every meeting, there should be something that we all know that always stick with a pen and say that move forward with the conversation with the decision maker, whoever that is, that group, that this entity actually has an impact and not it's getting like we were fed with information. Now you go and figure out something and then come back in a month. Wow, how many months do we have before things already move forward and we're so behind?
Well, that's the constant challenge,
I know.
I think, in my observation of advisory bodies, is syncing up your schedule, identifying your interests, getting you briefed up to the level you want to be to engage, and then matching it to how decisions and processes occur inside the city. So you're feeding it and you're meaningful input and you're satisfied and the people you're advising are satisfied and it's all working, right? But we have historically been really hard to pin down internally who's deciding what and through what kind of process and when, like we're as surprised as you. Not about a particular person or decision, but I have felt challenged by that every day that I've been here. I think what we can do is help you be as clear as possible about what you want to work on. And then I think our role is to get as clear as we can be about how it's gonna work on the city side. So we can, like I said, match them and have it be meaningful. But it's really hard. I mean, I can't think of an optimized group at the city necessarily.
I think Corbin has her hand
Oh,
up.
sorry.
If I can join into this, and Suen, let me know if I'm not on the same page as what you're discussing. One of the things that I have been concerned about is that the board is not used as a tool. We're not used as a resource. We are just another soundboard for situations that are happening. In some ways, that's great when we're in our working groups and we're getting into the nitty gritty and we can provide information and feedback. I think that's where we're really strong. But when it comes to citywide issues, it doesn't seem like the board is being tapped. And one of the things that I would love for us to figure out is a type of process. So when there are issues dealing with parks, that people know to come to the board and not go to city council first. And I've said this before. And city council also works with us and saying, oh, I hear that you have this issue with parks. Have you talked to Portland Parks and Recreation? Have you gone to the Portland Parks Board to discuss this with them versus it being handled or being discussed at that level first? We are so staffed with, heads of Parks and Rec, people who are in the know that can give people information. Not that we want to become a complaint department necessarily, but this is also an opportunity, as we've seen before, for people to say, this is how we enjoy our parks. This is what's important to us. We know that the levy is coming up. How can we help move that forward? And so I think there's just an opportunity that's being missed by not using the board. And I would love to see more discussion around what that relationship is between city council and the board and what advising looks like in a real meaningful way.
Can I add a couple of things that are coming to mind as you say this? I will say there's a few offices that have mentioned through the grapevine to me that they have been telling some community members that you should come to the Parks and Recreation Board meeting. So I think that's slowly but surely happening as that we're being recommended as a public forum. And then I will also add one of the things that was talked about at our task force today is to say that if there is a advisory body like the board that writes a letter to city council, that one of the things that get, you know, coded into our new city policies is that the city council responds. And not just a thank you for your letter, but also a response to the actual letter. And that is something that people are really receptive to. So I think I would say that this is being discussed. Our liaisons are really great in that they have their own advisory bodies that they oversee, but they really see that that the interests are in favor of you all and not just the city.
I'm glad to hear that. And, you know, as more and more discussion happens around it, I would love to be updated on what maybe a process that might be evolving, because it is a new council. And so I do expect some growing pains and new ways of doing things. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I will ask the team if I can share some of the documents that they've shared with me today. So you can get some,
You need a monthly report out from Michelle's report.
I might need to.
Yeah.
I will
Thank you.
say, I love that you all are discussing city council actually responding to our letters, because they do feel like they.
It does feel like you're just sending it to them. Yes.
Like our charge is actually to advise city council, right? We work with parks, but our charge is not just to advise parks, it's to advise city council on parks related.
We really got into the weeds. I mean, I'll bring up some examples. I was telling Sonia that there was even a talk about like, do all advisory bodies provide parking validation? Because some don't. Do all advisory bodies provide food during meetings that are around the evening time? Some don't. Do all advisory adhere to like state public meeting laws? Some don't. We do, and that's great, but some don't. And so I like to think we're like kind of like one of the better ones. But also that, you know, is there other barriers for folks from the community to participate, such as do they not have devices that they can tune in to Zoom meetings? Even though we have hybrid meetings, is it better that they get, should we have a pool of devices that advisory body members can borrow from that they can use for this? And then, you know, people were discussing, should we give them a city email, and what's the complication of a city email? What does that mean for, like, you know, now people are burdened with checking 2 emails. Is it a good idea to, you know, so these are like kind of the pros and cons discussions that we're having, and people will really get into the weeds and argue for and against. And that's why I say that like a lot of people try to have folks in mind and share different perspectives, because some people will have experience where they're like, no one's going to check their email, do not give them a city email. But then some people say you should give a city email so that they don't have to worry about their personal emails being enmeshed with board work. And so that's like the kind of discussion that we're having, and I think it's really, really productive. But there's so many things to discuss that in some cases I feel like are not relevant to us because we already do the things that they were saying.
A very short follow-up, and thank you, Corbin. You kind of pulled the words out of my mouth. From this discussion, how and who is going to push forward with letting the city council at least respect that kind of working relationship that we can actually enhance community engagement as well as messaging, because it seems like there are citizens or groups like to just directly go to the city councilor, and then that words stop their ears, and then they blurt out in the public forum. That became something that collectively can be very influential on what's going to come next. And what's going on here when we're doing it with the community doesn't have that bug at the ear at the city council. So I'm hoping city council actually will be a little bit more disciplined, that they need to collectively understand there's certain things that not just who talked to them last or who has the power to get their cell phone, and then everything is decided before we even have a chance to say, wait, it doesn't make sense. Can we volunteer you, or who gets that
Well,
kind
we're
of
all in
messaging?
different, I mean, well put and well taken on all counts. So Michelle is in a forum for that. I'm in spaces where I can reinforce that, including directly and through our leadership channel, not through the DCA. The conversation you had last time about how to be effective ambassadors and messengers with council is so important to build on and keep growing into. And then, you know, I feel really encouraged by council. The whole advisory body premise is about like, you should all be mutually satisfied and find it valuable. And I don't think we've gotten there as a city. But I do feel, bye Claudio, I don't know, I feel hopeful. But we can't stop saying it. Like it requires everybody to kind of be like pushing toward that same outcome goal, just relentlessly.
Okay, so I think we can take Ally's question. I do want to move things along because I'll make sure Chris has enough time to share his presentation.
We're ahead of schedule because Jessica's not here,
Yes.
but yeah, okay.
He has to leave at around 6:45, so I want to give him enough time.
I have a super quick question
Yeah.
for you. First, you know us so well, so I'm really glad you're on that group to talk about advisory. Are there any actually advisory board or members that are also a part of that group?
There are not,
Or is it
and
all
there
staff?
was an ask to invite folks on advisory bodies or to have folks from the city come to advisory body meetings to give a presentation on what is expected.
Okay, yeah, that's a missing voice.
Yes.
So
Like one thing I was arguing was like, can we have more tech in this building so that, because if they're gonna make people adhere to public meeting laws, that we need more tech so that we don't have room conflicts like I did with the advisory committee. We can't use room 216 right now because they need the space more than we do. So those are like, there's so many different things being asked, and I definitely want to keep everyone's interests in mind. Corbin, you have a quick question before we move on?
Just a statement. It's a quick plug. If we can wire up our community centers and get Wi-Fi so we can get back into community. And that also can create situations where communities can be in contact with us.
Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. It actually worked well that we had more time for discussion with some empty space, so that's really great. Next, we are going to move on to the asset management update from Chris. Thank you so much.
Positive Dan.
Kitchen.
I will.
Earn it, Chris.
Is it?
Chris, do you want to sit here?
Sit in the middle.
I didn't be able to see. That's all good.
Wherever you feel.
Yeah, I think wherever you like. is
Yeah, the camera's right. I can also like turn the camera so it's clear.
My camera here.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. Great.
You pull up the presentation.
Like this, make sure we're synced up. Well, that's coming up. I'll introduce myself. My name is Chris Silke. I use he, him pronouns. I've been the program manager for asset management for parks for a little under 10 years now. And this discussion doesn't presume any prior knowledge, though I know many here have prior knowledge of our programs and stuff. And we're going to be high level and into the weeds a little bit. It's really the same presentation that was given to the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee, or I'm sorry, the Parks Board Committee on Infrastructure back in May. So it's largely the same presentation. You can go ahead and I'm sorry, not next slide yet. I just want to make sure it's on slideshow. Yeah, let's go back. Okay. So what is asset management? You know, I'm going to give you two definitions. The first one comes from a textbook, and that is, it's the coordinated activity of an organization to get the most from your assets, the most from your physical assets. In reality, it's an organizational capability. And I say that because it's not the responsibility of just one team, though I am the program manager and there's a small team that works for me. It really permeates a whole organization. In practice, what does that mean? Does it mean there's multiple programs and multiple touch points where an organization makes decisions where we want to bring the best information and the best business practices to bear. And we're going to dive deep on a couple of those. But before we do, I'll give you a few examples. So we lead the major maintenance prioritization using a risk-based approach to prioritize our major maintenance. We manage the workspace program for the Bureau. So, you know, which work groups are where and if relocations are needed and that sort of thing. Manage the work order system. So the Bureau has
roughly 30,000 work orders per year that come in, and this is everything from preventive maintenance on the HVAC system to 311 that come in and they need a response and so on. Those flow through the system. So the asset management isn't about doing the actual work. It's about making sure that the right work gets done and that these needs get to the right place. And then there's a few add-ons. We have managed GIS and CAD. But what I really want to spend time on today is assessments, because y'all may have heard that we have a massive backlog, you know, $600 million, $700 million. What's this huge backlog that we have? And so my learning objective today for you is that you come away with high confidence in that we do have a massive backlog, and we know we do. And these assessments are why we know we do. So next slide, please. So we're going to dive into a little bit about the history of the asset management program and asset management in general. We're going to go deep on built asset assessments. We have a new program around natural area assessments. And then we'll discuss the takeaways and what's next. And I'd love to answer your questions along the way, as well as at the end. So next.
Let's wait till the end of the presentation so you can get through your presentation
Okay.
and we'll ask questions.
And I did arrange for an alternate transportation for my kid. So if need be, I can stay.
Great to know.
Thanks. So in 2013, the city auditor did an audit on Parks and Rec, called a maintenance audit, and it basically, you know, found a bunch of things that we needed to do differently. One of them was to create an asset management program that didn't exist. It's not uncommon for Parks and Rec to not have an asset management program, actually. So in some ways, Portland was a forerunner in establishing a formal program here at the city of Portland. I started right around the turn from 2015 to 2016, first full-time asset management position, and proceeded to build out the program, creating some positions, reclassifying some positions, establishing a framework for getting this work done, and we'll dive more into what that is. In 2021, some of the work that we do is across the city, and one of those things was collaborating to create a new policy, and this policy was published in 2021, a new citywide policy on asset management. And I want to point that out because myself and my colleagues from environmental services really wanted to make sure that natural assets were covered in that policy so that they can be treated equally with our built assets. And there was a sense that a lot of our budget processes and capital planning and so on is organized around built assets, and nature needs a fair shot too. In 2022, there was a citywide program maturity assessment. So like, how are we doing? Do we have a good program? Not quite an audit, a little more collaborative than an audit. And I'm going to show you the results of that in just a minute. And last year, aligned with charter reform and the new form of government, was to create a proposal. This is a citywide proposal to create a new citywide asset management office. And that's still a concept that's out there. Citywide asset management was audited earlier this year, reinforcing that is potentially a good concept. And then what's happening now on the citywide level, there's a creation of this asset management strategy, and that was directed by City Council just a month or so ago. Next slide, please. So this is kind of busy, and I'm going to take a minute and walk through it. What you're looking at is a portrayal of the results of this asset management maturity assessment. You have the different bureaus on the left. Remember, this was 2022, so slightly different than some of the names today. Down on the bottom is sort of the scale. And on the left, the orange is a beginner. You're just starting out. And on the far right is excellent, like best in class. Everybody in the world should be looking to you for how to do this kind of work. And then in the middle is the light blue, and everywhere in between. Then you have these categories on the top, and I'll just read them in case it's not clear. So the first is fundamentals. Do you have a policy? Do you have a training program? Those sorts of things. The second column, which is highlighted, is asset information. And I'm highlighting this Because as you can see, it's a darker blue square for Parks and Rec, and that's showing that this is a strength of Parks and Rec. And that's where we're going to spend some time today, is to give you confidence in that strength. Next is service levels. Do we have documented, established service levels? And that's not just, do we have a park within 3 miles? That's also service levels about turnaround times and things like that, as well as technical service levels. So it's very comprehensive. As you can see at the bottom, that's the Water Bureau. The Water Bureau is a world leader in asset management. So the benchmark within the city is quite high, and they have well-established processes for all of this. Next is risk management, life cycle costs, financing. We can, and it was interpreted as funding, not just financing in the context of this maturity assessment, and then reporting and evaluation. So we're not going to spend 5 hours today going into all of these. This is why we're going to do a deep dive on just information, but we can dive deep into any of these. So this is the world of asset management portrayed in a few categories and a few ratings. Next slide, please. So why did we earn that high rating in asset information? A lot of that has to do with our system-wide assessment program. And it's because of the people. I just want to point out some members of the asset management team. Faiz Al-Dulimi, he actually ran a building assessment program in the Middle East. Next, Patrick Key, who's being bashful. He started as an AmeriCorps volunteer with Urban Forestry. Maddie Flood was doing engineering assessments for an engineering consultancy. So this is the team that is doing all the work, evaluating the assets. Next slide, please. So as you may know, we have about 200 properties. We have hundreds of buildings. If you squished all our properties together, it would equal about the size of Tigard. If you squished all of our buildings together and made them next to each other, it would be bigger than the Moda Center. If you stretched all our pathways, lined them up, it would go all the way to Bellingham. And on and on. We have retaining walls, underground utilities, culverts, so many of the things that we don't think about every day. A lot of people think, oh, it's playgrounds and it's soccer fields and it's pools, but there are so many other assets. So our charge is to catalog and assess every single one of these with a goal of doing it every 5 years. Next slide, please. So how do we do that? Well, we follow a standard. So there's an Australian standard for doing these assessments. It's not quite enough. And this overall score, 1 to 5, 1 being very good, 5 being very poor. It's kind of a letter grade for an asset. And you can think of it as how much life the asset has left in it. And so if it's a 5, it doesn't have much life left in it. This scale is also used citywide. So there's a citywide report and every bureau is using this scale, but it's not quite enough. So we dive into deeper detail. And don't worry, we're not going to read the deeper detail. I just want to show you that it's there. So next slide, please. For example, for pathways, what does a 5 very poor condition actually mean? So we have pictures, we have detailed standards, we have very detailed criteria for all of this. And all of the assessors are trained on what exactly that means. And then we do cross checks to make sure they're all doing it the same way. All right, so this team is going out, we're grading all of our assets. And we're storing it in our GIS system. And why do we care about this result? How does this translate into that $600 million a year backlog? Next slide, please. So first, we can create visibility for you and for everyone. We actually have this up on the Sustainable Futures website right now, where you can link to a dashboard and you can see the condition of any of the assets in any of the parks. And you can click on them and then see the pictures, and you can actually see why it was given a poor grade or a good grade. And so that transparency is being provided to anyone who wants to see it. But by having all that information, we've been able to prioritize work that wasn't getting attention. So for example, this is Farragut Park, and as you may know, Farragut Park just had a pretty significant investment that finished up. That happened because of this. It wasn't rising to the top in any prioritization scheme. We looked at the data and had a, whoa, this park needs some investment. There was no one advocating for it. We were able to program a bunch of different categories of funding to make some significant improvements in Farragut Park. So that's just one example. Next slide, please. This is a little wonky. I'm going to try to orient you to this. You can also look at long-term trends. And so what this is showing is that in blue, we did the condition assessment round on all of our buildings. And then we did it again in 2025. Like I said, the goal is every 5 years. We're not quite there yet. But as you can see, the condition has gotten worse. So good would be on the left, poor condition would be on the right. And the trend has been that the buildings are getting in worse condition. And I could show you a graph like this for our bridges. I could show you a graph like this for our playgrounds and for so many different kinds of assets, for pools. And the trend is holding, and that's despite the 2014 maintenance bond. That's despite our annual major maintenance allocation. That's despite capital set aside and Build Portland, the investments in Mount Scott Community Center, and so on. So this is the trend of the portfolio. You know, it's rock solid based on, you know, all that information I presented earlier with the methodology. So, and this is showing the past. Next slide, please. We can actually see into the future too, because these, having it all in one place, having all this information means that we can run scenarios and say, I know that it costs X dollars to replace playground equipment. We have this number that are going to fail, and based on the condition grade, this many more are going to fail in the next 10 years. Therefore, I need to replace this many. And if I don't, then the condition is going to get worse. So just look at the red bar. That's all you really need to look at, and see our current state is on the left with, you know, a good chunk needing significant investment. If we don't change anything about our funding, this is where things are going to be. But if we do have a surge and a significant investment, we can actually reset the clock. That's an ongoing investment, though. We need these ongoing investments.
At what level?
This was modeled at like the $700 million level. And we can slice this anyway too. Like these bars are made up of different asset categories, as buildings, as pools, and so on. We can slice it. We can slice it geographically, all different ways. Another benefit, next slide, please, is we have these eyes and ears, and we can catch things before they get bad too. And so I just want to share, this is the roof truss at Peninsula Park Community Center. And during a routine condition assessment, Faiz noticed a structural crack and brought it to our attention. We had a structural engineer dispatch and really evaluate it in detail. We created a repair plan, and we were able to stop that crack from growing. We were able to prevent, you know, full roof replacement or worse at this community center. So having eyes and ears that know what they're looking for out in the field also catches and prevents things from getting worse than they otherwise would be. And then with communications, next slide, please. So you may have seen the KGW news tidbit. I think it was about a 5-minute thing from Evan Watson. I guess it's 2 years ago now. So they actually did a public records request for all that data, and we gave it to them. We gave them all the data, and then they made their story kind of based on that, and also did a tour of Multnomah Arts Center to show the human impact of those conditions. So that's part of the communications. And then next slide, please. Also, I mentioned the citywide annual report. So we contribute to this report along with all the other bureaus. And I'd like to think it gets read by city council. It's certainly provided to city council. And so they can see the differences amongst the different bureaus at a very high level. It's only about 1 page representing Parks and Rec, maybe 2 pages. And then every bureau gets to show that information. So I'd like to pause here on the built asset assessments though, and just see if there's any questions before transitioning to the natural area assessments. Yeah.
Yeah, are climatic conditions included in the future projections for asset conditions?
Like adaptation and.
Yeah, like
infrastructure.
thanks to warming conditions, this is how the building will respond, for example.
Only in the sense that we know we need air conditioning everywhere, and that's programmed into the backlog, but it's not yet a funded project. We don't have a full assessment of like all the different flooding and all those impacts. So a little bit, I guess, would be my answer.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one's really just clarifying from
Yeah.
one of your earlier slides. So there's no citywide asset management. There's just each bureau has their own kind of people, and then there's a proposal. There was a proposal in 2024 to bring it together. That's right? Okay.
That's the current state, and
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that things are moving towards creating that citywide program or office.
Okay.
Does city operations now reflect asset management as like a standalone to be figured out org unit or not yet?
It doesn't, and it was interesting, one of the early org charts that was proposed for the reorg did show asset management and city
I thought it might
operations.
have come back in July.
And then it went away and it didn't come back yet.
Sorry.
So active discussions on that.
Okay, and then my second question, which you might not have the answer to this, but what you're sharing poses a question to me on the methodology or the strategy for putting assets in the first place. So like, this is a big city. Do we have a strategy of standardizing kind of what is put in so that when we're looking at management or replacement or things like that, or are we looking for every park and building to be new and unique and all those things? I recall I've heard on the ground some things out in East Portland of like, oh, they just put in this new park, but then like stuff's broken. And then like in COVID, oh, it's gonna take a long time to fix this because we don't have the part or whatever. So I'm just wondering, is there any methodology or strategy to putting assets in the first place and repairs, or is it just?
There is, and there's an ongoing effort for standardizing sort of the technical specifications of what goes in, as well as some standardization of what the what is. And I think trash cans is a recent example where we know that using a standard trash can makes it easier for everybody, whether you're maintaining it, whether you're emptying it every day. Especially if we pick one that's durable and it's ergonomically the best one. We don't want different capital projects or different projects to use, different types of trash cans. So there's some standardization happening, definitely.
I thought of one more.
Yeah.
Is the, I guess thinking about what Dr. Corbin mentioned about technology, is that a part of asset management in terms of like assets that you have, I don't know, in buildings, I guess?
I may miss the question.
It was earlier, Dr. Corbin was talking about like community centers having the capability to do meetings and stuff. So I'm just wondering if the Wi-Fi or routers or just technological assets is a part of this, or is that separate?
I'd say it's adjacent. We work really closely, so we make sure that we have knowledge of where they are. For example, closed circuit televisions and our what's it called? The Rose network. So the internet, the city internet and things like that. Actually, the Bureau of Technology Services manages a lot of that independently.
That's separate, okay.
And we don't need to go back to the slide, but they were actually on there on the asset management maturity assessment. And they're actually closer to the Water Bureau, so they have a pretty good program.
Oh, interesting.
Running things through the life cycle. They know computers need to be replaced every X number of years. They have a replacement fund for it and things like that. I'll say it's a little easier because they are shorter lived assets with very finite timeframes. It's actually harder when you have infrastructure with like 100-year timeframes like our pathways. Because yes, some of our pathways are 100 years old now, and you know, they need to be reinvested in. And surprisingly, no one saw it coming. So we have to get that all into a system to make the business case so we can make those investments.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Some quick ones. Not every project is going to be so clean cut that this is parks, or this is water bureau. I don't have a better example, but for example, elk. Am I getting it right? Elk or stag? That one has Peabody, water. We somehow adopted it, but then it's also worked through the Parks Foundation. How do you know that $600 million, is it all our problems, or is there something also like 20% is actually water bureaus, and who is
Trying to give away your liability, yeah, I wish.
We do run into these circumstances quite frequently, especially around regional pathways, with Metro having responsibility, even the Port of Portland has responsibilities, and Peabody and all that. The honest answer is that it's always case by case, like, because the property records, sometimes it actually takes a record search to find out, like, ooh, what does the easement actually say, and who is actually responsible for this? So we try to improve the data set over time, but to actually get that true visibility at these edge cases would be a huge lift. But perhaps closer to the question maybe is the city right now is working on creating a project management structure that addresses exactly this.
consolidate all the maintenance?
Or it's called the Unified CIP for Capital Improvement Program. And it's one advantage of parks being within Public Works is that there's an effort now to look at capital projects from that perspective, from Peabody, water, BS, and parks, and to look at it holistically. And that effort's just starting, so.
Look at it as one thing, pay for it as another.
I was gonna say, and if that could produce money.
Yeah.
Jacob, Ali, Corbin.
Okay, so I see in that graph there that built infrastructure is a separate category from buildings and pools. What's the difference between built infrastructure versus buildings?
Yes, and I'm happy to send the link to these reports as well. It's just a legacy categorization. So pathways and things like that are included in built infrastructure. I like to think of it as horizontal infrastructure, and then the buildings and pools, even though pools are horizontal, we classify them as vertical infrastructure. It's just one way of categorizing these. We actually internally use different categorization than this that's provided for the annual report. So it's just a figment of legacy categories.
Thank you. So of the $615 million in the maintenance backlog, is there a sense of how much of that is due to inflation in like costs and materials and labor versus how much is due to like active depreciation of like the assets?
Yeah. So we escalate at construction cost index. Seattle's construction cost index, there's not actually one published for Portland. They're really close though. And that escalator is built into the algorithm. So every year that gets added. And then the depreciation, if you will, we only factor that in when we go through in that every 5-year cycle and reset the clock, because lots of things can happen. Things can actually get better if the right project happened at the right time in between those assessment rounds. My sense is that it's we're probably starting at a relatively poor condition of our portfolio, and we're only recently I mean the last 10 years, recently documenting it really well and having a clear understanding. the Maloma Art Center did not get in the condition it's in the last 5 years, 10 years even. That's been decades in the making. And now we know, and now we have it really clearly documented. So my sense is that it's more towards that decline in portfolio condition.
But there's not a hard number for the amount of that 615 that can be directly attributed to inflation versus anything else.
It's a great question. I've never looked at the numbers that way. I'll go back and see if I can slice it that way.
For my question, Jacob, there's also a fair amount of out of compliance with the ADA within that 650 million as well, versus just degradation of assets. I have a question on once an asset is flagged, the timeline. I ask because the Whitaker Pond dock from start to finish will be over 1.5 years out of commission for its upgrades, which seems like a massive amount of time for such a really important community asset at one of the only wheelchair accessible natural areas in the city and the best venue for it. So I'm wondering, and this probably isn't you, you're like, hey, this needs to, but what is it when an asset is flagged and actually moves into that? What does the timeline look like to actually move it to the finish line with the work? Because to me, 1.5 years for a dock seems excessive. I recognize there was metro money in there and it's a whole bunch of things that are more complicated than I know, but it seems like a lot of time.
Yeah, I would imagine there was permitting involved there for that one because of the location and the complexity of the work and the environmental sensitivity of the area. I can't really answer that question, although I'd say it depends on when you start the clock, because full funding in hand, I wouldn't start the clock personally until full funding is in hand. So when you start peeling back some of those things like full funding, full permitting approval, contracting is another big one. A lot of the processes that are not within Parks and Rec's direct control, we can influence them, but they're not within our direct control, certainly impact that timeline, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you.
Corbin?
So I might have missed this because I was fussing around with my Zoom during the part of the presentation. How are the assets assessments assessed in connection to community outcomes and needs or impact or community impact?
Yes, so is this how do different communities value different assets? Is that?
Or just not necessarily how the community values it, but putting in one asset is going to have a bigger impact in one community versus another. Like, how is that brought into conversation around asset management?
Yeah, formally through our prioritization process, when we're determining where to make the investments, that level of service, the geographic location, including the demographics of the area.
There's not a public process that people can vote or rally for a particular asset?
In the past, during the budget process, a proposed capital improvement program was shared, and that would have been the only opportunity that I'm aware of for that specific input into the prioritization. What I can share is that I mentioned that unified CIP effort that's happening across Public Works. There is a category of work that includes our public engagement professionals that is about public trust. And so there's a recognition that needs to be looked at. Yeah, our internal prioritization process for maintenance is internal. It is not external.
So how are you sure that the assessments that you're moving forward with or the funding that you're going to be put towards the project is going to have the biggest impact of communities? Is it thought of in that way? I'm just trying to find the connection between I
Yeah.
watch a lot of Home and Garden television, and so one of the issues is that um, a big impact might be fixing plumbing in a particular community center. It's not necessarily sexy, but it'll function and have the most impact for community members versus something that's, you know, a shovel-ready optic situation, right? And so like, how do you weigh those is where I'm going with this.
Yeah, and since you put it that way, I would say there is some consideration to that aspect. We call it criticality. And what it is the idea that keeping basic function of an asset is more important than perhaps the aesthetics. And the classic example is the roof at a building or community center needs to be repaired before we repaint it on the inside. And that is directly factored into that prioritization equation. I mean, I'll just be straightforward. This annual major maintenance process, it's just triage. Like there is not like an optimization. It is truly just like literally like Maximo, I think one year I asked you to decide between two community centers that really had extremely critical needs, and we didn't have the funding to do both. So like it's truly a triage environment.
Thank you. The reason why I'm asking is because especially if we're going to have a conversation about partnerships. And so, for instance, thinking about the roof versus painting inside, if the city can handle the roof, maybe a donor can paint inside, and then, you know, you're able to impact the community in a greater way. Are we thinking about those possibilities as well? Like what
That's
can
an-
be
Yep.
what can be offloaded to donors and partners, and what's necessarily needs to be done by the city, because if it's critical infrastructure to making sure that whatever assets function accordingly.
For me, conceptually, that is a primary lens.
Okay.
Yeah, and we also look at ability to fund to like often a partner might not be able to take on a whole project, but by leveraging, you know, our internal funds, we're able to accomplish it together. It hasn't been split. Like you do the plumbing and you do the carpet. It's been trying to do the whole project because of these other aspects I mentioned, you know, the contracting, the procurement, the design, the permitting and all that. It's kind of hard to piece things out. So you want to do it all together. But in terms of funding, it can certainly work that way.
Let's move on to the natural areas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So great questions. Thank you. So for natural area assessments, this was made possible by the 2020 levy, which created the position that's held by Patrick Key, who I referred to earlier. He was hired specifically to head up our natural area assessment program. And the way we started looking into it was first, what else is out there? We looked at all the practices across the world, really. And there are some good models out there. And so we copied as much as was relevant. And not 100% of it was relevant because there's some Portland and organizational considerations that had to be brought to bear. So we did benchmarking. And then one of the first questions is, how do you inventory and classify the space? So our natural areas, when they were represented digitally in our GIS, they were effectively big blobs instead of being sectioned into the type of land use that was on it. So whether it was a forest, whether it was a woodland, a natural area might have different kinds of land use. So we had to section the different land uses on the natural area. And that's what you see there on the right. It's just an example. The red dots are sampling. So we can't traverse all 4,000 acres of forest park, and we can't traverse, you know, all of our natural areas. So what we do is a sampling where you go to a spot and collect the information for one sample. And then we use that to create an assessment score. So we have the benchmarking. We did the inventory and the classification, that's all desk work. And then the rating development was done twice. We did it, did some field testing, changed it, and then deployed it last year. Next slide, please. Okay, we're not gonna read all this, just know, so remember I showed the slide that had the 1 to 5, and then we had the details about how you classify the built assets. So for natural assets, about half of it are things that we can get remotely, where we use our GIS and we use information that's been made available from Metro and other organizations, and looking at the land cover and can say, oh, what's the overall health of this natural area? And then the other half are called the on-site condition scores. And this is where someone is going to one of those little red dots and actually observing these conditions. So it's soil condition, the vegetation condition, the native vegetation, nuisance vegetation, the structure of it, woody regeneration, which is it our like new trees growing on their own, like our new saplings popping up. And then also as they're fallen, decaying wood from the more mature trees. So this is in general how that score is created. Next slide, please. And again, it's on-site work. It can't be done in the wet season. It's really hard to evaluate the soil in the wet season. Safety is of course paramount. We really try to do this work with at least 2 people 90% of the time. It's not always possible, but try to do 2 people. And with the seasonality, 2 years ago, 2024, we were able to do it with seasonal employees. And then they're collecting the data in the field. And sometimes there's no connectivity in many of these places too. So it's, every now and then it's record and then upload later. Next slide, please. I'm just going to jump to the results. So, about 3,000 hours of effort later from that field assessment, we have some results to share. And this is from about 20% of our natural area portfolio being evaluated. So remember, it's the 1 to 5 scale, and 1 being, hey, this isn't great ecological health or very good condition. 5 being, this is really not great condition. And we have this kind of like right in the middle. That's not ideal, actually. We want to be more on the good. We want things to be skewed. We want a B at least, not a C, is one way to think about it. We want at least a B average. Next slide, please. But again, now that we have this information, we can slice it. This is also up on our website. Happy to share the link so anyone can drive into any one of the natural areas and actually see what species are present. They can click in and see some pictures from those little red dots where they did the assessment, and they can see exactly how that score was calculated. So this information is available. Next slide, please. And again, we can slice it by the type of land cover. So the oak woodland from the upland forest, from the shrubland, and looking at the different conditions. So this is across the types of natural areas, not just within each one. So you can look at it for the different types of land cover. Next slide, please. And with communications, there's a pretty nice report that was created, and I'm happy to share that. Maybe if I share that with you to send with the notes, that explains all this. So if it wasn't clear here, if you read the report, there's lots of details provided in that too.
Just a quick question on how you define health within this, and does that include resilience, or is that looking at sort of like, what is your definition around health?
Of the condition. Yeah. So we're calling it a natural area condition, and I use the phrase ecological health without a precise definition on it because it translates better just to different audiences, and condition might imply like, oh, is it just like, is the tree broken? Like, sometimes I use it just to break the perception that we're using the same exact framework with the natural assets. So
And are you working with, and then just assessing it based off a set of criteria? Are you working with, like any other departments or
I,
to like forest health, and are you
yeah,
sort of science
it's,
at all? How are you bringing that in?
yeah, it's based on criteria that was developed 100% collaboratively with the land stewardship, city nature team and the ecologists from that team. So, got their input every step of the way and incorporated it.
But it's not accounting for resilience, it's just accounting for health,
I wouldn't,
kind of like.
so that term can mean
I
different
mean,
things,
resilience,
so.
about like, is this healthy right now? And if it's flagged as something that needs repair or whatnot, how are you going to assess it in terms of managing it for the future versus managing it for current conditions?
Yeah, the big one that stands out is the prevalence of nuisance species. We know that that's not as good from a wildfire management perspective. We know it's not as good from a resilience perspective. And so we have captured that, and that's one of the big weights into that overall score. So I guess in that sense, resilience is captured. And I'll just share that we've been tracking and reporting as a Bureau performance indicator the percent of invasive species treated, or I think it's number of acres treated. And this is also an effort to kind of get in, well, where are you starting from? Like what's the prevalence of our non-native and nuisance species that would be treated? Because otherwise we're just measuring how much, the acres, and we don't even know, are we actually impacting the overall condition or health, if you think of that biodiversity as health.
We're gonna, yeah, but can we wait till the end, like we did with the first part?
I thought that was the end.
Oh, it
It's
is.
got a takeaway slide, so next slide, yeah, if that's okay. Just, so, what's next? It's important for all organizations to know what they're responsible for and what condition they're in. And assessments provide that foundational information. We've been an early mover. And what's next? We were not able to continue the seasonal worker funding for the natural area assessments. So Patrick has been a Superman and doing what he can, but one person doesn't quite get it done. And then there's a lot happening in these other areas of asset management that I mentioned, the unified CIP. There's the citywide asset management strategy that may result in some kind of centralized office. And then within Portland Parks and Rec, you may have heard we're replacing our work order system, and that kind of gets into the internal maintenance business processes and information management. So each one of those could be an hour, and I just want to mention that those are out there too. That's what's happening. So that's the end. I'm happy to take more questions.
Thank you, Sonia. Did you want to start? And thank you. Yes, thank you.
You mentioned that the built asset evaluation framework is from Australia. It's international, it's longstanding, it's very mature. The natural area version of that, you said you built internally. Is that an emerging newer part of the overall asset management world? And if so, how new is it? How cutting edge are we?
We're not quite bleeding edge, but pretty darn close to bleeding edge on that. There's a few municipalities in Canada that have been doing that work for only just like 4 years instead of just like 2 years for us. The actual protocol I've been sharing with my peers, I participate, just professional development with other asset managers, and I've been sharing it. I'm like, please don't create your own, copy our protocol, because we've done the best practice research, and we collected it, and we refined it, and we field tested it. So
Yeah, my question is on, so I'm looking at the thing, so lots of the on-site condition score is soil, native plant, invasive plants, all that. There isn't anything about wildlife, so I'm guessing you're in the build it, they will come model in terms of your assessment, but I'm wondering if you use, if you're thinking of canopy layer, if you're using eBird data, if you're using community science, or you're using partners to be able to understand what wildlife are using the space, if you're what's the, you know, if you're restoring an area, like Fern Hill Wetlands has done community science for a long time because they did a huge restoration project, and so they've continuously monitored bird populations specifically, but you could do it with amphibians, you could do it with insects. So are you all incorporating wildlife into your overall health model, and if so, how?
No, and it was a conscious choice. Generally, and this is where this is kind of new, because this is applying an asset management framework to living things, and you know, it's a bit of a, you know, well, what's the right approach? But one of the tenets of asset management is we're not trying to get the perfect information. We're only trying to get the information needed to make the decisions that need to be made, and no more. And there's a cost for every piece of information that we gather. We did consider, you know, do you do studies? Do you do surveys and things like that? And we view that as like, oh, that's probably a follow-on to this initial, you know, you get the basic information, and that work is happening also, like the ecologists do manage many of those studies and things like that. We did, oh, I'm gonna forget what the instrument was called. We, in our initial round, we had this instrument that looks at the immediate tree canopy. It's like a reflection of, you know, how much tree canopy is right above you. And we realized, oh gosh, this has taken like 5 minutes per site, and that's too much time. Like, you know, we're doing all this other stuff, adding 5 minutes per plot was too much time, because you have thousands and thousands of plots. So we decided to not do that and rely on the remote sensing canopy layers that are out there. I do think there's tremendous opportunity for some kind of like citizen science or involvement of others in the actual work. When we did those seasonal positions, I want to say it was almost 200 qualified applicants for 3 positions for the summer. So there's a strong appetite, and you know, lots of great qualifications of people to help out. It takes the organization to you know, create the space for that input.
I would say there's a lot of opportunity, even just for people like Jeff, who I run into him at Arrow Heights, I can't remember his last name, but he's an ornithologist and he eBirds there multiple times a week, every week, right? Like his data is good. I think there are ways you could incorporate things that are already happening, or you could use song meters. There's a lot of more passive ways that you could do data collection, at least if there's sites that you're really focused on, that could incorporate wildlife. And if you're not seeing certain species where they should be,
Right.
What are the kind of, in order to help with that asset?
Yeah.
Are you missing canopy layers? Are you missing snags? What kind of habitat elements are you missing?
Great. Yeah, it's a great idea. And likewise, we're not doing like soil samples and really like analyzing, is the soil healthy and things like that, the visual.
Egg counts and for amphibians, none of that stuff, right? Yeah. Thank you.
And City Nature does do some of those things at certain locations for certain specific purposes, but it's not part of this.
I guess I have more questions about them. Like, what does it mean to have ecological conditions and ecological health? Because if you're not accounting for habitat and like water quality and all that, like what is then your ecological, like what is your definition of that? And to say that it's good or bad, I think there's just such complexity behind that.
Yeah.
This feels very, and I don't mean to in a negative way, but this feels very surface. And so having a better, and I haven't read it, so there's probably more definitions, but better understanding like the nuances there and what that actually means would be helpful. So when we say like our natural areas are in fair condition, that means so many things to different people that like, if I saw that, I'd be like, okay, but like, what does that actually really mean, right? Like, I mean, I work in forestry, so I come from like I come from that world, and I'd have all those questions around the watershed and the habitat. And others who recreate there will have questions about, you know, what am I gonna see? What are the views and what are the different species and all that? So I think having at least that somewhere for us to better understand would be helpful. Or if this assessment is still underway, it'd be helpful for, like, if there's the opportunity for us to be a part of it, or if there's an opportunity to provide some type of input. No, yeah, no, I don't want that. I mean, if there's an opportunity to provide input there, I think that would be helpful for how it's received in a broader context.
I don't know if Corbin or Patty was.
It was Corbin and then.
I love the conversation. It would be great to have some sort of biodiversity index, and that can be assessed over time, whether we're gaining or losing, based on the health of the ecosystems that are within Portland. My question is specific to the asset management, and does it map on, has it been a map onto neighborhood income in which we can understand maybe who might be more likely to be dealing with failed or failing infrastructure versus those that may not be incurring the same issues? And could you tell me a little bit more on that relationship between the health of the asset and the income level of the community?
Yes, I've, so on our dashboards, there actually, we're probably gonna have to change this now because of the new order. But there is one of the drop-down filters you can do by what's called our parks equity score. And you can see the parks that will show up depending on which score you select. You can see what the conditions of the assets are in those parks. And that score was based on and this is something that is used for multiple business processes in the Bureau, was based on percent of the population within the service area that's experiencing income lower than the poverty line. It's based on the percent of population. Is it higher or lower than the Portland average for people of color? And then same thing for youth. And that's what that's based on. I've done the statistics multiple times, and I haven't detected a statistically significant disparity related to that metric. I haven't done a statistical analysis for the subcategories of that metric. And I've also done that analysis for our work order responses too, and I haven't detected a disparity related to that metric. Very, very coarse analysis. It was more like just, hey, like, let's put this guardrail up and make sure that we're not, where there is a statistically significant difference is, I'm sure everyone probably knows, is East Portland in terms of, are there assets actually there, not the condition of them. So that is a difference for sure.
And is that something that's also talked about, is the deficit of assets in these neighborhoods? Or are you just looking at what's there?
Yeah, it's in our business processes for the investment decision making. Is it talked about, like, I see Jen, I know, like in the tree planting strategy, it's definitely part of the narrative that's in there and part of the focus of the analysis. And then in our level of service, I'm 90% certain that is also part of it. And I'm just racking my brain. I'm not sure where those were published.
And just before you go, Jen, do we have any public comments, Michelle?
We don't have anyone online.
Great, Jen, sorry.
Yeah, Lauren, the A&D folks would speak better to the level of service, but that is, Chris is right. That's what that's referring to. And that is how characteristics that are included in making decisions about funding investments by parks. Where is there a dearth of something? And there are criteria for what a dearth means. That's my term. I wanted to say two other things. One, I wanted to really recognize Chris and his team for this work. Prior to it, there was very little, and in some cases, none. And I know as a program manager, I really appreciated the real discernment they've used in which characteristics are they assessing for, which are the most useful and cost efficient, since we always have to weigh that. The second of the two things I wanted to say was there are also similar information about trees in the city, including on private property, streets. We have parks, city properties, we have inventories, and we have a partnership with the with the United States Forest Service to do something called the Urban Forest Inventory and Assessment, which is done on a sampling model routinely, which is how we can say, for example, how many trees of what size exist in the city. And also LiDAR, as Chris mentioned, for canopy metrics. Where is there canopy? Where is there not? What are the changes over time? I just wanted to mention that. It's kind of a compliment to what Chris and his team are doing.
Thank you, Jen.
Patty?
So you're collecting all this information, which is fantastic. So are we using that information to inform the priority? So when our some funding between the 600 and 700 million come, are we using that as the list to start from? And then, or who decides what are the 10, the 3 that we can do?
Yeah, and this is one of the core values of this approach is we're starting that list from an awareness of all the issues that are out there. And I gave the example of Farragut Park, like no one was advocating for a big repair project at Farragut Park, but by looking at the information, we were able to elevate it a priority. So it's all used as the starting point, and we score the backlog using some course metrics, the condition, that criticality that I mentioned, is it the roof versus the carpeting? And then the equity score are the 3 metrics that go into that initial. And then I look at it, and then there's so many that are just like, oh, wait, actually we did that one. Or actually, brought up the question, actually, that's a partner facility. Wait a minute. So there's some data validation. And then there's the ground truthing that happens, which is talking to every maintenance supervisor and confirming that the things that are on the short list are actually their high priorities. Like, oh yeah, that's really a thing, and we really need to get that done. Or like, yeah, it's in bad condition, but we can live with it for another few years. Like, so that validation happens. And then it goes on from there. Then you start getting into the project sequencing and can we actually accomplish this project? And then there's the money. So when you get to the step of, well, we have 2 million and we have, 45 million on our short list, and you're just picking the 4 or 5. That's a discussion usually.
Well, and if you were talking about a really material amount of money, like you just said, you'd layer on top of that policy direction from your decision makers. And if you were talking about a bond, you'd be talking about a different political lens that they would be bringing to it. So like, I suspect you would start here and then you'd iterate through that lens, and it would, you'd end up where you ended up. And how closely it tracked would be for those folks to decide.
Were there any assets that you considered end of life, like repairing them versus a new asset?
Oh, look at Maximus.
He knows what I'm gonna say, actually.
Because that's that balance sometimes,
Like that it's better to repair, or that it's better to just start over, or yeah, So that should be part of what's called the alternatives analysis. So ideally, in an ideal world, you get to a short list and you say, oh my gosh, we gotta fix these things. And then instead of asset management, a project manager might actually get a bunch of engineers to do many different studies to find out what are some real costs for repairing this. Because our estimates are really high level. They're based on, dollars per square foot. But then someone really gets into the details and they may say, whoa, we're not gonna replace Multnomah Art Center. It's a historically listed building. And it needs everything, like it needs a new roof, it needs seismic reinforcement, Matt Dishman Community Center. That's gonna be a major project. Would probably, I shouldn't even say, like, so we have to get into all that before anyone could make a recommendation about repair or replace. For the big ones, like a play piece, oftentimes we'll do play piece replacements where they just like replace the slide or replace a couple things rather than do the whole playground. So that happens quite frequently.
Sabrina, then Corbin.
Yeah, a couple things. I'm thinking about, one, when you said equity, I'm wondering what does that mean? And if community usage is embedded in equity and is, when you're thinking about healthy parks, healthy Portland and priority communities, is that connected? So we're looking at community usage, or is it just whoever is the loudest, advocating for their thing that they like, but it might just be like you and two of your neighbors versus another asset that's could have a big usage. And that also leads me to thinking that, as with everything, I would imagine there are many communities who don't know that they can advocate for themselves and saying, hey, this asset's, people may come up to me and, talk as a fellow neighbor, but do they know that there are forums for them to express, hey, something's broken, we really think it should get fixed, or whatever the case might be. And so I know maybe you're not answering that part of it, but I guess I am wondering about that. When you say equity, what does that mean? Is that connected to Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland? Does it take into consideration community usage?
So when I use that term, that equity metric, it refers to nothing more than census data, for all the issues that may arise with the use of census data. It refers to the demographics of the service area. And I fully acknowledge that that is not a complete consideration of equity. The current process does not factor in the use, the specific use, the community input on the use. It's just the starting point. And it's one way that we're able to consider all 200 properties using at least one consistently derived input. So it's not based on the surveys or we have looked at doing more of that work for specific business cases where you are doing this evaluation, and there was a citywide process for a while where we had to compete for funds internally and we had to have some of that information. Sometimes we weren't able to compete because we didn't have the information. Yeah. So I believe it's currently not factored into the process as you've described.
Corbin?
Thank you for all of this information. I'm thinking as a board member, our duties are to serve as a public forum as well as advise city council on park and recreation issues. How can we use this information to help us understand and then advise? What would you say would be best practices or thinking about benefits and constraints that we might come across with this information?
And do you know what any other asset owning bureaus do with their advisory bodies? Are good practices here?
I don't, I've heard, and I'm not, never participated, but I've heard that the Water Bureau does get into the weeds about specific projects and things like that. I don't advocate that as a best practice though. And I guess from my perspective, when I started at Parks, the then director was very proud of themselves, saying, and you know, Chris, we get $4 million a year for major maintenance. And I had done my research and had a little bit of understanding of the size of the park system. And I smiled politely and was like, oh, great. What did I get myself into? Because that's wholly inadequate for a system of this size. So from my perspective, that's a top line message. And it gets worse with every day that you don't invest adequately. So like the return on investment for $300 million is $1 billion. And I think this problem has become so big that it's easy to not address it as an elected official. Let's start though, like, hey, maybe don't give us, we don't need 600 million, maybe 15. Like, hey, if we could bump that up to 15 a year, we could actually do a lot of good. And again, that 15 has a return on investment of like 60 million, 100 million.
See, Lauren had a comment on this.
Sure, I just wanted to say a couple things. We have done for the Parks Board in the past, we've gone through the capital project selection process. We have a PowerPoint presentation on it to walk you through it in more detail. But the short answer to your question about do we think about equity as we go through there? The process is yes. And do we think about level of service? The answer is yes. For both of those things. We look at how well the area is being served. We call that the service variety score. And what the level of service recommendation tells us, how many experiences do they have, and what kind of condition are they in, if they have them. We also look at the household rating, how many households or people are being served, and how many more would be served if we did these proposed improvements. And then and as Chris said, we always had used in the past the equity score, which was percentage of people of diversity, the percentage of children and youth, the percentage of incomes that are experiencing poverty below the U.S. Census poverty level. So we're happy to come back and go into more detail on that with you.
With that, it is 6:59.
Can I make one quick comment?
Yeah.
So we didn't get to talk about working groups. Thank you to the new members who replied to me about what your interest groups are. Every single one of you did say you wanted to shadow land use and infrastructure. So it might take more than 1 month to let everyone shadow everything and make their decisions. So I'll keep working on that and let the working group chairs know, like, see who we can shuffle around and let you shadow. But I just wanted to make that comment because there's a high interest.
Cool. All right, we are adjourned until our next meeting on October 14th. So thank you, Chris, so much.
Thank you.
Wow, Chris. Amazing work, Chris.
Yeah. Hey, Michelle.